I I just wanted to do a kind of like a voiceover for this video, but what I really wanted to talk about, I wanted to do a follow up to my previous video about hip hop in 2005 and why 2005 was the most important year. Um, in that video, I wanted to do a follow up. You already know that in my previous video that I was going to talk about 1998 and why 1998 was very important for the basically the comeback of hip hop music. Um, some people who grew up in 1998 remember that as the time of really what we call the big pun era, or we could say, that was the era of No Limit. So No Limit Records, um, No Limit Records became the follow up to really Death Row Records, because when Death Row came in to the media in 1993, the popularity of West Coast music started to spread uh, nationwide, and Death Row Records spearheaded gangster rap into a commercial success and into a commercial entity. One would say Death Row is one of the most popular record labels of its time, but it also had a rise and a fall. And it rises with the beginning of Snoop Dogg, and then it falls completely after the shooting of Tupac Shakur. One of the things that makes 1998 fundamentally important is that with 1998, we saw a lot of things happen with music. You started seeing people really regroup themselves because, 1997, the previous year before that, we lost Biggie Smalls, or the Notorious B.I.G. Um, After that significant loss of both Biggie and Tupac, we kind of go into this era where there's a space open wide for the South to get their footing into the industry. Um, then comes No Limit Records and what they were doing, and then Cash Money Records, two of the biggest labels to actually be completely independent and then get their own distribution deal with Universal. Well, Cash Money with Universal Records, and No Limit with Interscope. And one of the very big significant things is these two successful rap labels, they didn't go around trying to get a record deal. They already had an established record company and put out multiple records in mass. Master P put out a record breaking 25 records in 1 year. That's, even today, is very unheard of. 1998, Master P really ran things. He had Mystical. He had C Murder. Two of the biggest rap artists and then Silk the Shocker. And what happened there is that you started to see more airplay of Southern rap music once that era comes through. Then in New York, even though it looks like things might have subsided, here comes Big Pun. And Big Pun starts to take the largest, like, was the biggest thing coming out of New York City at the time, when he did the deep cover freestyle. And once we heard deep cover, once we heard him rap over deep cover, that was now people saying, well, now he's the big hype now. He's the next real thing for New York. And Capital Punishment comes out, and it becomes the first record to win a Grammy, a Latino influence record that won the Grammy. What we notice about 1998 is, with Capital Punishment coming out, then we hear the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill take home almost close to 13 Grammys, I believe. Once that record comes out, it turns the industry upside down, and it forced the record industry to really go into competitive mode. Def Jam used to be the hottest record company, would actually signal themselves as putting out some of the best jams, but they could only depend on LL Cool J but for so long. So then they hired Lyor Cohen. Lyor Cohen discovers DMX. DMX becomes a superstar. Rough Riders becomes a big thing. Then the Lox come out with the song Ride or Die Bitch. And it just one thing after another. It was all these competing sounds. And what I remember very vividly about that time period is you couldn't turn on a radio and not hear a Rough Riders song, or not hear DMX on a track. He puts out 2 records back to back. Each of them gained him notoriety and success. So much has happened. Even when I was younger, so much had happened with 1998. I think, being as young as I was, I remember 1998 as being kind of influenced by the style. Like everybody around my neighborhood had style. And one of the things that I remember very vividly was in that era, that was the Bubble Goose Jacket era. Lugs, FUBU, skull caps, Fat Farm, and Tommy Hilfiger jackets. Everybody had to have a fat jacket. Everybody had to have the big ass Hummers and the trucks, the Range Rovers. Those were big things in 1998. So the style was very different. And you couldn't get away from it. Some people would say that's the shiny suit era. You know, um, it, one of the things in 1998 kind of reminds me, kind of what I think about is 1998 being a very, very awkward year, almost. I was in school, but all my friends, we went down to the skate um, roller rink. We would hear Master P. Um, then there was also, of course, Noriega or Nori with Super Thug. That was a big song back then. And some generations before me, some people that were 20 in their 20s and maybe early teens, some of them might remember having posters on their door, you know, hearing Super Thug blasting on radios. Um, Pharrell and Star Trek, they all had. You started hearing that emerging sound. When they did the song Super Thug, and you heard it, you now you starting to notice their sound being the predominant now. So once that happened, it was now you're starting to hear Pharrell really put his signature on a lot of tracks. Um, Even with hip hop, there was still R&B that we had a lot of R&B kind of precede that too. So there was a balance. R&B, we had 702, we had Total, SWV released their last album. Um, then you had Genuine, and it was a lot of. One of the things I remember the most is that there was a lot of R&B, and fitting it into the pocket of hip hop. You know, the music had to have that balance, and the music industry was really at its apex. Because I would say after 1999 and year 2000, that's when things drastically changed. With Napster and all these other things, and nobody really going to record stores like Sam Goody's or Tower Records anymore after 2001. But in 1998, people wanted to go to the record stores. People were in the record stores. People had lines outside the record store, and then for some odd reason, all of that stopped. Um, but the thing I remember the most about 1998, especially for hip hop music, everybody in my neighborhood had the flyers closed. We all had to have the flyers closed. And I know I already said this before with Fubu Lugs, but we also, I rocked Timberlands when I was in school. I had me a fresh pair of Timberlands. I had me a Tommy Hilfiger Bubble Goose jacket. So it none of it is foreign to me. It's been 25 years, and it seemed like 1998 went really, really fast. I've never seen a year go that fast before in my life, because so much had happened during that time when I was around. But what's so great about that is, we had a lot of stuff. Christmas was the best. It's probably the last best Christmas I've had until, we get to, the early 2000s. And there was a lot of movies that came out that year that I remember. I think I remember Bug's Life being a big thing too. I remember that, and then Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is crazy. But when it comes to the music, there were a lot of groups out. I remember Next being a big thing going into 1998. And also, one of the biggest songs of that era, and one of the biggest R&B songs of that era, was Silk's There's a Meeting in My Bedroom. I remember that being played frequently on the radio. I would go downtown. A car would go past me. They would be playing that song. That song would be blasting out of windows. You just heard it. Like, it was one of the biggest. That I do remember that Silk's Meeting in My Bedroom was one of the biggest songs in 1998. That and the Rough Riders anthem. There were so many songs out that time. Like, it's just like you couldn't keep up with it. But back to my main point, what makes hip hop so important for 1998 is that you start to see a lot of factions. The South finally got its footing with Juvenile and the song Back That Ass Up came out 1998. And it became one of the biggest rap songs in the late 1998 going into 1999. And everybody needed that one thing. Like, everybody has that one song. I think I remember one song. Mary J. Blige had a R&B song too that came out that year, and that was another big one too. I really love that song called All That I Can Say. And You're My Everything. That was another song that she released. That was two beautiful songs. She really had R&B that year. But I think really that year was the year for Big Pun. Pun personified everything for hip hop. Pun, and I would say Nori too. Nori had his own solo thing, and DMX. They all took the cake as being the top rappers for the East Coast. Master P had his thing with the 25 albums released. So, there were heavy hitters all over the East and the South. Not so much, like, you start to hear less and less from the West Coast. I think the only album that I know that was one of the biggest West Coast albums, probably Dub C's Just Clowning and Corrupt's solo album, Seawalk. Those were probably the last big albums to come out of the West Coast. Other than that, I can't really think of any albums that really touched the surface. Maybe you could, comment and let me know what I missed, because I know those are the only albums that I remember hearing that were the bigger albums. But in closing, there will never be another era like 1998. 1998 personifies many things for many different people. If you were around that time, you know that was the Monica Lewinsky scandal year. And I think when people think about 1998, they think about that in particular. But it was also the music and how hip hop kind of came back from a very heavy situation with not having Biggie and Tupac around to carry the torch, and not to consistently always lean on other artists, but actually find solace in the fact that even though those two great artists are gone, there were many other great artists that were willing to step into those big shoes. And I think maybe in some cases Jay-Z was one of those, DMX was one of those, Big Pun, Lauryn Hill, Wyclef Jean, all of them stepped in and stepped up after the tragic demise. And they showed us that even though they might be gone, it still does not erase the fact that something beautiful came out of that tragic event. And that's why I consider 1998 to be the post-Biggie era. The post-East Coast, West Coast hip-hop era that we grew out of. But you tell me what you think. I'd like to hear some of my viewers comment and give me some feedback on some of these topics. If you're listening to this, hit the like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. But I'd like to hear some feedback from you. What do you think? Anyway, I'm Tony J, and Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Media Talks TV. I'm signing out. See ya.